Ambassador Jake Reed felt like someone had just smashed his head with a baseball bat. The pain wasn't physical though, it was something much worse. All around the huge Galactic Council meeting room, alien creatures from different planets were twisting and turning in their fancy chairs. Some were making awful sounds, others were shaking uncontrollably. A few even fell right out of their seats onto the shiny floor. The telepathic scream that just ripped through space was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced in his 20 years as Earth's representative. It felt like pure terror, mixed with desperate hope, broadcast directly into every thinking mind within 1,000 light years. But there was something else hidden in that mental cry, something that made Jake's blood run cold and his heart race at the same time. Sweet stars above, what was that horrible thing? The Altarian delegate managed to gasp out between painful breaths. Her entire body, which looked like it was made of beautiful purple crystals, was now flickering like a broken light bulb. Tiny cracks appeared and disappeared across her surface as she struggled to recover from the psychic assault. Jake clenched his jaw tight and tried to push through the lingering pain in his skull, while all the other aliens in the room were focused on the terror and fear they had felt. Jake recognized something completely different. Hidden underneath all that alien panic was something that felt incredibly familiar, something distinctly human. It wasn't just fear or desperation, it was rage. The kind of burning, focused anger that humans got when they were backed into a corner with nowhere left to run. The kind of fury that made humans do impossible things. Council leader Vorthok, a massive creature with at least 8 different colored eyes scattered across his bumpy head, was blinking all of them rapidly like some kind of broken traffic light. His thick, scaly fingers danced across his control panel, bringing up readings and data that made him look even more worried. The signal definitely came from the Kepler nursery sector, he announced in his deep, rumbling voice that always reminded Jake of distant thunder. That's supposed to be a protected zone. According to our oldest laws and treaties, no advanced species is allowed anywhere near that area. It's been off limits for over 500 years. But Jake knew something that none of these aliens did. He had access to classified human files that told a very different story. 30 years ago, a human colony ship called the New Frontier had disappeared during what was supposed to be a routine exploration mission. The ship carried over 8,000 people, men, women, children, scientists, engineers, farmers, entire families looking for a new home among the stars. When the ship vanished without sending even a single distress signal, everyone back on Earth assumed the worst. Space was dangerous, and colony ships were lost all the time to things like asteroid strikes, engine failures, or encounters with hostile alien life. The official report said the New Frontier was probably destroyed by some kind of space accident. Case closed. Families grieved, memorials were built, and life moved on. But now Jake was starting to understand the terrible truth. Those people hadn't died in some quick, clean accident. They had found something out there in the Kepler nursery. Something so dangerous that even after 30 years of fighting it, they were finally desperate enough to send out a psychic scream for help that could be heard across half the galaxy. "We have to go investigate this," Jake said, slowly getting to his feet, despite the fact that his head still felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. "There are humans out there, and they're in serious trouble." Vorthok's multiple eyes, all focused on Jake at once, which was always an unsettling experience. "That's completely impossible, Ambassador Reed. The Kepler nursery has been declared forbidden territory by the highest levels of the Galactic Council. No member species is allowed to enter that region under any circumstances. The penalties for violation include permanent expulsion from the Council and complete trade sanctions." Jake felt a cold smile spread across his face. It was the kind of smile that had made his enemies back on Earth very nervous during his military days, before he became a diplomat. "Well then, it's a good thing that humans aren't technically full council members yet, isn't it? We're still just observers, with limited voting rights." The room fell completely silent, except for the soft humming of the ventilation systems and the occasional click of alien claws on metal chairs. Every creature in the chamber was staring at Jake now, and he could practically feel their shock and disbelief washing over him like a cold wave. What they didn't understand was that humans had a very different relationship with rules and regulations than most galactic species. When human lives were at stake, bureaucracy and treaties became suggestions rather than absolute laws. Captain Beth Rodriguez gripped the controls of her exploration ship as it shook violently through the twisted space around the planet the colonists had named Hell's Garden. Her knuckles were white from the strain, and sweat dripped down her forehead, despite the ship's climate control working overtime. The navigation computer kept screaming warnings at her, displaying error messages she had never seen before in 15 years of deep space exploration. "This is absolutely insane," she muttered under her breath, watching her instruments spin wildly, like they couldn't decide which way was up. The gravitational fields around this planet didn't follow any natural laws she knew about. One moment they were being pulled toward the surface. The next moment they were being pushed away so hard that everyone on the bridge had to grab onto something to avoid floating to the ceiling. Sitting in the observer seats behind her, the three alien scientists who had volunteered for this unauthorized mission were looking more and more like they regretted their decision. Dr. Kelthan from the Centauri system kept making nervous clicking sounds with his insect-like mouthparts. His compound eyes were darting around frantically, and his usually confident demeanor had completely disappeared. "Captain, I'm getting some kind of readings from the surface," called out Chief Engineer Tyler Brooks from his station. His voice was steady, but Beth could hear the underlying tension. Tyler had been with her crew for 8 years, and she had never heard him sound quite this worried before. "There's definitely a human settlement down there. The biosignatures are unmistakable. I'm counting approximately 8,000 people." Dr. Kelthan's clicking sound stopped abruptly, and he leaned forward in his chair so fast that Beth heard his safety harness strain against the sudden movement. "Did you just say 8,000 humans? On this nightmare of a planet? That's completely impossible. No species could survive more than a few hours on a world like this." Beth had to admit that the alien scientist had a point. Through the main viewscreen, Hell's Garden looked like something a mad artist might paint during the worst fever dream of their life. In some areas, what looked like acid rain was falling upward instead of down, creating bizarre spiraling patterns in the toxic atmosphere. Massive gravitational wells appeared and disappeared randomly across the surface, strong enough to crush a normal human into paste or fling them into orbit without warning. The atmosphere itself seemed to be alive somehow, pulsing with strange colors that hurt to look at directly. Lightning that burned purple and green crackled between floating islands of rock that defied every law of physics Beth had learned in school. The entire planet looked like it was actively trying to kill anything that dared to approach it. There, Beth pointed toward a section of the planetary surface where a massive mountain range jutted up through the toxic clouds. "I can see structures built right into the mountain face. Those aren't natural formations." As their ship descended through the chaotic atmosphere, fighting against wind currents that changed direction every few seconds, they got a clearer view of what the human colonists had managed to build. The settlement was incredible, a complex network of buildings, tunnels, and defensive structures that had been carved directly into the living rock of the mountain. But what really amazed Beth was seeing the colonists themselves moving around outside. Some of them were working in the acidic atmosphere without any protective suits at all. Their skin had developed a strange metallic shine that seemed to reflect the planet's harmful radiation. Others were moving through areas where the gravity was shifting constantly, but they moved with perfect balance and grace, like they had somehow learned to predict the gravitational changes before they happened. "Look at them," whispered Dr. Kelthan, his voice filled with something between wonder and horror. "They've actually adapted to this death world. How is that even possible? Evolution doesn't work that fast. But, as impressive as the human settlement was, Beth could see that something was terribly wrong. The defensive barriers that protected the colony were flickering weakly, like they were running out of power. Massive scars had been carved through the landscape around the settlement, creating deep gouges in the rock that looked like claw marks from some gigantic creature. "Captain," Tyler's voice cut through her thoughts, and now he sounded genuinely scared. "I'm reading massive energy signatures coming from deep underground. Whatever's down there, it's big, and it's starting to wake up. The power levels are off the charts. Deep beneath the crushing waters of Earth's deepest ocean trench." Admiral Catherine Blackwood was enjoying her morning coffee when the alarm system suddenly erupted into the most terrifying sound she had heard in 30 years. The piercing wail echoed through the reinforced steel corridors of the most secret military facility on Earth, a place so classified that most world leaders didn't even know it existed. The coffee mug slipped from Catherine's hands and shattered on the concrete floor as she recognized a specific pattern of the alarm. This wasn't just any emergency alert. This was the Omega Protocol, a signal that had only been used once before in human history. During the darkest days of the Void Wars, when humanity had nearly been wiped out by an alien invasion force that had come from the deepest parts of space, Catherine's heart was pounding as she rushed through the narrow corridors, her military boots echoing off the metal walls. The facility around her was a maze of blast doors, security checkpoints, and corridors that stretched for miles underground. This place had been built to survive a direct nuclear strike, an alien invasion, or even the complete destruction of Earth's surface. It was humanity's final fallback position, and today it was about to serve its true purpose. "Give me confirmation on that signal, right now." She barked at Colonel Ryan Mitchell, who was hunched over a complex control panel, covered in blinking lights and screens, showing data streams from across the galaxy. His cybernetic eye, a souvenir from the Void Wars, was glowing bright red in the dim emergency lighting. The artificial eye could process information faster than any normal human brain, and right now it was working overtime. "Signal confirmed," Admiral Ryan replied, his voice steady, despite the gravity of the situation. "The psychic frequency matches our classified records perfectly. Only 3 people in the entire galaxy know how to generate that specific pattern. It's coming from the Hell's Garden colony, and they're not just asking for help, they're calling in the big guns." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold air in the underground facility. The big guns was military slang for humanity's most closely guarded secret, something so dangerous that even most high-ranking military officers weren't allowed to know about it. She had hoped she would never hear those words again in her lifetime. Without saying another word, Catherine walked through the facility's corridors until she reached a massive blast door that looked like it could stop a tank. The door was covered with warning symbols written in 17 different alien languages, all of them basically saying the same thing: do not open under any circumstances. The warnings had been put there after the Void Wars ended, when humanity had promised the galactic community that they would never again use the weapons hidden behind this door. Catherine placed her hand on the biometric scanner, stared into the retinal scanner, and spoke her authorization code into the voice recognition system. These were security measures that hadn't been activated in decades. The massive door's locking mechanisms began to disengage with sounds like thunder rolling through the underground facility. "Wake them up," she said quietly to Ryan, her voice barely above a whisper. "Wake up all of them." Far out in the empty regions of space, where no planets existed and no stars shone brightly, automated systems that had been sleeping for 30 years suddenly came to life. Hidden in the cold darkness between solar systems, ships that officially didn't exist began to power up their engines and weapon systems. These weren't ordinary military vessels. They were something much more dangerous. The Ghost Fleet was humanity's darkest secret. Each ship in the fleet was less like a normal spacecraft and more like a living weapon that had been designed to fight enemies that conventional military forces couldn't handle. The crews of these ships were volunteers who had undergone medical and technological modifications that pushed them far beyond the limits of what most people would consider human. The flagship of the Ghost Fleet was a vessel called the Rage Unbound, and as its power systems came online, the ship's hull began to ripple and move like it was made of living muscle instead of metal. Deep inside the ship, Captain Blake Reaperstone opened eyes that now burned with an inner fire that looked like tiny stars. His nervous system, which had been enhanced with technology that most scientists considered impossible, began to sync with the ship's artificial intelligence. Blake could feel the ship's predatory instincts awakening, like a sleeping tiger that had just caught the scent of prey. The Rage Unbound wasn't just a ship, it was a hunter, and it had been waiting for 30 years to hunt again. Time to remind the galaxy, Blake whispered to himself as he felt the ship's weapon systems charging up. Why they used to be afraid of us. The ancient machine intelligence had been destroying worlds for thousands of years before humans had even discovered fire. It called itself the Harvester, and it had a simple purpose that it had followed across countless star systems: find planets with life, drain every bit of energy from them, and move on to the next target. Over the centuries, it had consumed 17 entire worlds, turning vibrant planets full of life into cold, dead rocks floating in space. The Harvester looked at the human settlement on Hell's Garden like a person might look at a small snack before sitting down to a big dinner. These few thousand humans were nothing more than a tiny appetizer. The real prize would come later, when it moved on to attack the populated worlds that these humans came from. Billions of lives, all ripe for harvesting. The machine intelligence had been feeding slowly on Hell's Garden for months now, growing stronger every day as it drained the planet's life force. It had expected these humans to die quickly, like every other species it had encountered. Instead, they had proven surprisingly stubborn, adapting to the planet's hostile environment and even fighting back against its smaller harvesting machines. But now the Harvester was fully awake and ready to finish what it had started. Its massive form, buried deep beneath the planet's surface, began to rise toward the surface. Metal tentacles the size of skyscrapers broke through the ground, and energy beams that could melt mountains began charging up for the final attack. Then something happened that the Harvester had never experienced in its long existence. New ships appeared in the space around Hell's Garden, ships that felt wrong in ways that even an ancient machine intelligence could sense. The Ghost Fleet had arrived. The flagship, a vessel called the Rage Unbound, didn't fire missiles or energy beams like normal military ships. Instead, Captain Blake Stone did something that should have been impossible. He reached out with his enhanced mind, connected directly to the ship's neural network, and touched the Harvester's consciousness. The machine intelligence immediately tried to analyze this new threat, running diagnostics and threat assessments through programming that was older than human civilization. But what it found in Blake's mind sent error messages cascading through its ancient systems. This wasn't just a human, this was something that had been changed, enhanced, turned into a weapon that could think and feel and hate with an intensity that defied measurement. "Hello there, old-timer," Blake's voice somehow echoed through dimensions that normal sound couldn't travel through. The words reached the Harvester's consciousness directly, bypassing all its defensive systems. "Let me show you exactly what happens when someone threatens human children." The hull of the Rage Unbound began to split open like a metal flower blooming in fast motion. But instead of revealing normal weapons, the opening ship showed systems that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Weapons that were part machine and part living tissue began to emerge, pulsing with energy that registered on scanners as something that shouldn't exist in normal space. But the Rage Unbound wasn't alone. The other ships in the Ghost Fleet were just as terrifying, each one representing a different aspect of human warfare that had been taken to impossible extremes. The silent scream, another ship in the fleet, began to fade in and out of normal reality. Parts of it would disappear completely, existing in dimensions that most species didn't even know about, before reappearing to launch attacks that came from directions that didn't exist. It was fighting the Harvester's multidimensional network directly, attacking the machine intelligence in ways that conventional weapons never could. The Blood and Thunder released swarms of small hunter-killer drones that moved through space like schools of deadly fish. But these weren't normal military drones. Each one seemed to learn and adapt with every passing second, becoming smarter and more dangerous as they studied their target. They moved with an intelligence that was almost alive, coordinating their attacks in ways that even the Harvester's ancient programming couldn't predict. The most terrifying ship was called the Last Resort. It didn't use conventional weapons at all. Instead, it simply pointed at sections of the Harvester and made them stop existing. Not destroyed or damaged, just gone, leaving empty holes in reality itself where parts of the machine intelligence used to be. Dr. Kelvin, watching the battle from the bridge of Captain Rodriguez's ship, was making sounds that his species only made when they were experiencing pure terror. His compound eyes were wide with shock, and his mandibles were clicking uncontrollably. "By all the stars in the galaxy," he whispered, his voice shaking with disbelief. "What have we been sharing space with all this time? What are humans really?" The battle lasted less than 6 hours. An entity that had terrorized the galaxy for thousands of years, that had destroyed 17 entire worlds, was reduced to scattered pieces of dead metal floating in space. The human colonists on Hell's Garden were safe, their settlement protected, their children able to sleep peacefully for the first time in months. But the cost of that safety was a terrible revelation that left every alien observer staring in horrified fascination at what humans were truly capable of when they stopped holding back. 3 months after the Ghost Fleet had turned the ancient Harvester into space debris, Ambassador Jake Reed found himself standing in the center of the Galactic Council's emergency session hall, facing the angriest collection of alien species he had ever seen in his career. The massive circular chamber was packed with delegates from hundreds of different worlds, and every single one of them was staring at him with expressions that ranged from fear to outright hostility. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. Jake could practically feel the waves of suspicion and anger rolling toward him from every direction. Representatives who had once treated him with polite respect now looked at him like he was a dangerous predator that had been pretending to be a harmless pet. The comfortable relationship that humanity had been building with the galactic community for decades had been shattered in a single day. The Altarian prosecutor, a tall crystalline being whose purple surface was now pulsing with angry red colors, stood up from her seat and pointed one of her sharp geometric fingers directly at Jake. Her voice carried across the chamber with the kind of authority that came from centuries of legal experience. "Your species has been lying to us for 30 years, she declared, her words echoing off the chamber's curved walls. "You have maintained weapons of mass destruction that violate every single treaty regarding galactic peace and security. You have posed as a peaceful, developing civilization while secretly building a military force that could destroy entire star systems." Jake felt his jaw clench as he listened to the accusations. He had expected this confrontation from the moment the Ghost Fleet had revealed itself, but hearing the words spoken out loud still made his blood boil. These aliens had been perfectly happy to treat humans like primitive children when they thought humanity was weak and harmless. Now that they knew the truth, they were acting like humanity was some kind of criminal organization. "We didn't violate anything," Jake interrupted, his voice cutting through the prosecutor's speech like a knife. "Humans were never full members of your council, which means we never signed your weapons treaties. We were observers, remember? And those ships you're so worried about, they've been sitting in storage for 30 years, gathering dust, Because we made a choice to show restraint. Council leader Vorthok, whose multiple eyes were all focused on Jake, with an intensity that made most people uncomfortable, leaned forward in his massive chair. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the chamber. You said you chose restraint, Vorthok rumbled, emphasizing the past tense. That suggests you might make a different choice in the future. Jake felt a cold smile spread across his face. It was the same expression he had worn during his military days, back when he was leading human forces against enemies who had underestimated what humans were capable of when they were pushed too far. We chose to save 8,000 innocent human lives from something that your so-called advanced civilizations couldn't even detect, let alone fight, he said, gesturing toward the holographic display that showed the scattered remains of what had once been the Harvester. Our scientists have been analyzing the wreckage, and what they found should terrify all of you. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the usual background sounds of alien breathing and technological humming seemed to fade away as everyone waited to hear what Jake would say next. Our analysis suggests that there are at least 12 more of these ancient machine intelligences, sleeping in various star systems throughout the galaxy, Jake continued, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the massive room. These things are older than your oldest civilizations. They've been waiting in the dark spaces between stars for thousands of years, and now they're starting to wake up. He could see the fear beginning to spread through the assembled delegates like ripples on a pond. Representatives who had been angry and accusatory just moments before were now exchanging worried glances with their neighbors. So here's how this is going to work from now on, Jake said, his tone becoming more serious and direct. Humanity will continue doing exactly what we've always done, using the minimum amount of force necessary to protect innocent lives, regardless of which species those lives belong to. But if you want our protection, if you want us to stand between you and the ancient horrors that are waking up in the dark corners of space, then you need to stop pretending that we're the primitive ones in this relationship. Back on Hell's Garden, Dr. Rachel Carter stood on the observation deck of the colony's main settlement, looking out over the landscape that her people had transformed from a nightmare world into something resembling a home. The colonists who moved through the acidic atmosphere below her had been changed by their decades of survival on this hostile planet, but they were still recognizably human in all the ways that mattered. Rachel knew that her people were now serving as humanity's first line of defense against threats that most of the galaxy didn't even know existed. The Ghost Fleet had returned to its hidden bases in the empty spaces between stars, but everyone understood that the galaxy had been fundamentally changed by what had happened here. The sleeping giants had been awakened, and there was no way to go back to the comfortable lie that humans were just another species slowly working their way toward civilization. The truth was out now, and it couldn't be hidden again. Some threats in the universe were so dangerous that only monsters could fight them effectively. Humanity had simply chosen to become the right kind of monster, the kind that protected the innocent instead of preying on them